Sorry. Okay. Hello, guys. Hope you're all doing well and the semester is not killing you too much yet in week 4. Today's just the discussion for functions and data types. So if you go to files, there is a new folder called discussions, and there's a file right here. You're gonna want to download that and then open it in VS Code. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that. Give me a thumbs up when you guys are all good with that. Once you get it open, it should look something like this. Discussion. Okay, does everybody's screen kind of look like this with the file uploaded? All good? Okay. So discussions are more of just a recap. There's not really any new content, just really like the nitty-gritty of anything that we learned in the lecture prior. So previously, if you weren't at the lecture, we went over data types and functions. And so we're just going to be testing some code and writing a couple functions today. Should be pretty chill. So for the first one, we just have a couple comprehension problems. So we're going to be going over data types. For the first couple ones, I'm just going to give you guys a couple minutes to figure out all the types of these. So the different variables. We have a couple well, I won't say it because that would be giving you the answer. So just go through the couple first ones, write out the types of all the variables, and then when you guys are ready, just either stare into my soul or give me a thumbs up or something like that. And then we'll move on. That's basically going to be the general format for today. So you guys get a couple minutes and then stare at me, and then we'll move on. Yeah? Sound good? And raise your hand if you have any questions. Was that the file? So if you go into the courses under files
If you go to B courses,
and then go to discussions.
go to the internet.
I thought it was because
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to download this
And then open it in VS Code.
downloading.
So go here on your laptop.
I couldn't.
If you go, yeah.
I couldn't.
Oh,
Yeah. Can you go?
Oh, it's gone.
I couldn't.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is string, right? Because that's we're just string.
Wait, can I send an email?
And then just a number on the phone. I think that's
This is a.
yes.
May not be able to.
Physical email, but may I
I'm not sure what it is.
No.
This is an array, but I'm not.
download file and send?
The only difference between them is
No, it's
fractions
true.
and series.
That's what I would say.
There was also another type. It was tuples. Tuples are listed. Hmm. Okay, bracket of the list. Type that. It's a bracket of the list, then this might be a two.
That will be start.
Mhm. Yeah.
This week. One time.
Right. It says like year and specify what it is. The last one, I think it's yeah, it has like the. It wouldn't be anything.
Okay. Are you guys doing good or need more time? Good for the most part? All right, I'm going to go over this first portion right here then. So for the first one, if you're ever unsure about what the type of a variable might be, you can always use the type function. So since we have it set to variable 1, we can just type that in, variable 1, and put it under parentheses under type and then print it out. And if you save that and run it in your terminal, you don't have to use your terminal on your computer. I just strongly prefer it because I hate VS Code's terminal. It's evil. Okay, that is not what I wanted. Give me a second. Okay. Oops. Okay, so it's giving me an error because I'm running a bunch of stuff through this file right now. But for the most part, the first part is going to give me back class string, which is correct. We know it's a string because it has the parentheses, or you can also just use an apostrophe, but essentially a string is always going to have parentheses and it will be read in VS Code. So this one's going to be a string. For the second one, it's just a number. So it's going to be an integer. If it was a string, it would have these around it and it would no longer be an integer. It would be classified as a string, even though it's a number. For the next one, this one's going to be a float because it has a decimal. Anything with a decimal ever, no matter how many entries or numbers you have before or after the decimal, is going to be a float. For variable 6, that one's going to be a list because it's got the square brackets. And then kind of similarly, the difference between a list and a tuple is the notation that encompasses it. So a tuple is going to have parentheses. And this one, we also know that it's not changeable. So if you want to change anything inside of it, you're going to have to create an entire new tuple. And for a list, it is changeable. So you can add, I can type. So you can add or take away elements and you won't have to create a new list. You can just append or remove it. And then for the last one, this one is going to be a dictionary. And we know that because it's got the fancy brackets at the end, the curly brackets, and it also has entries. So it has a brand and then it has like a subcategory. And a brand would be Ford and then model Mustang year 1964. Any questions on those so far? Good? Cool. Okay. So for the next one, these get a little bit trickier. Did anyone figure out what the type of variable 4 would be for G? We didn't go over this one earlier, but it is going to be classified as a function because it's not G with the parentheses. G with the parentheses is going to give you an output because that's your actual function name. G itself is just the name of the function. Sorry, I said the same thing twice. G is the name of the function, and then G with the parentheses is your actual function. So that'll give you the output that your function is telling it or assigning it to. So that would be for the next one. So did anyone figure out variable 5 either? Any brave soul that wants to say it or guess? Yeah, what's up? Yeah. Or actually, no, it's not a string. It's kind of confusing because it will print beep beep, which is a string, but it's going to return a Boolean, which is true. So if you have a function, whatever it returns is going to be what it's like assigned as. So since it's returning a Boolean, it is considered a Boolean. Everyone clear on that? Does that make sense? Okay, and also something about functions is that you're always going to need a return statement at the bottom. Otherwise your function isn't gonna function. It's not gonna like it and it's gonna give you a real big error. Even if you put print, you need the return statement because that's what marks to Python as the end of the function. Okay, so moving on to 1.2. I'll give you guys a couple minutes for this as well. You can run these in your terminal if you just put print around them, which I would suggest if you forgot what these do. And then write a description in your own words of what you think they do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It was kind of like a side note in the last lecture. It wasn't like the main focus, but that's why we're going over it now. Floor division. Look, I ran it here. So floor division gives you back 1 and modular division gives you back 3. So 4 definitely goes into 459 more than 3 times. So that's a hint. And then floor division, 4 minus 3 is 1. But also 3 only goes into 4 one time.
Wait, why is it printing 3 when it's 459 mod 4?
So do you remember like 3rd grade or whatever, you would have to do remainders instead of getting decimals? Okay, is everyone good on this part? All right. So for normal division, It's just normal division. So this one will return 2.5, as we saw when I ran it in the terminal. There's nothing really special about it. That's just how we notate division with a singular slash. And floor division is essentially how many times the denominator will go into the numerator. So 3 only goes into 4 one time. So the expected output is going to be 1. And the modulo division is kind of the opposite of that. Modulo division is the remainder. So whatever is left over of how many times the denominator goes into the numerator. So for this one, 4 goes into 459 a lot more than 3 times, which is what the terminal gave me back. But 3 is just the remainder. So 4 can only go up to 456 without a remainder. So 459 minus 456 is going to give you back 3. So yeah, that's really good if you don't want a float to be returned, or same thing with floor division. Don't want any floats, do floor division. If you want to see if something is odd or even, modulo division is really good. All right, so moving on, we're going to cover strings now. So for these next 3 questions, we want to use string indexing to turn the words below into a word that's a part of the original word. So you can get really fun and funky with these if you want, because there's a lot of letters and you can make a lot of words with just like 6 letters or whatever. But for the most part, if you want to just do something simple and make sure you got indexing down, turn the word fastest into fast with just indexing. So what that would look like, or how I would do it, is set new word 1 equal to some code, so some indexing, which is going to be like this. That's the syntax for indexing. And you're going to want to put some numbers in there so that your output is fast when you print new word. Yeah. The colon? Oh, that's just part of the syntax for slicing. So, slicing is essentially if you have a string or list or dictionary, it's a way of breaking up what's on the inside. So if you have, say, like the word hello, and you only want the first one, you can slice it with a 0 index to only get, like, say, the H in hello. So you would essentially just put the word 1 brackets and then a 1. If you do that, or I'm sorry, 0, then it's just going to give you back an F. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to only do the first like 4 letters, you have to give it a start, stop, and then step. Step is essentially how many letters or things it skips in between. So if I gave it a step of 1, it's going to do every single letter. If I gave it a step of 2, it's going to do every other letter, and so on and so forth. So for this one, we're just trying to like cut it from fastest to fast and have it return fast as a string.
Sorry, it's not. In the that. Okay, 30.
Okay, are we feeling good about moving on and explaining these? Or any questions or need more time? Okay, thumbs up if you guys need more, or if you guys are good, or thumbs down if you need more time. Okay, we'll give a couple extra minutes. You guys are allowed to also work with each other.
So, you wanna like open up this file, like go to download? Right. So. Yeah, and then Python 3, and then the file. Okay. I heard when they.
You see them using the word file here in middle.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on so that we can get through more stuff. So for slicing, as a quick review, like I was saying earlier, if you want to extract a certain letter or element from a string, list, or dictionary, you're going to want to slice it. And we can do that by having this notation. So I'm going to set a new variable and call it new word one. So if we want just the first part of word one, we're going to start from 0 because Python is a 0 index. So the first letter of that string fastest is going to be assigned a number, and that one's going to be 0. And then if we want it to go until T, that's the third letter, because if we're starting from 0, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. That T is technically 3, and then it's not inclusive. So we're going to want to go to 4. So if we tell Python 0 to 4, and then print that, it should give us back a string that's just the first 4 letters. Okay. So let me mute these. It's giving me too many. If we just want the first one, it's going to give us back fast. Does that make sense with everyone? We cool with that? Okay. Another thing to note is that we don't have to put 0. If we just put :4, Python will automatically assume that we want to start at the beginning, and it'll give us the same output. So yeah, it's going to give us fast, even though we took away the 0. And then similarly with slicing, just as an example, if you wanted to start at the 4th letter instead and have it finish the rest of the word, you could do the same thing. You can either do 4, and nothing, and Python will read it until the end of the string, or you could do it until 4 and then 5, 6. You could do it up to 7, and it'll finish it. If you do it at 6, it's going to cut off the last letter. So let's see what happens. Yeah, it just gives us ES. So that's the ES in the end right here. But if we just wanted to finish it out, it gives us EST. Okay, so moving on to the next one. If we want it to just give us one word, we can either do out or side. So if we were just doing the first one, if we wanted to get out from this, out is 0, 1, 2. So we want it to index up to 3 because the last index where it stops is not inclusive. And if we print that out, it'll give us out. Or we can do it another way, and we can start at 3 and have it run to the end of the code, the end of the string, and it'll give us side. And then similarly, race car, you could do either race or car. I'm just going to do one. Let's do car. So we're going to start 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 at the 4th letter. And we're going to let it run until the 7th letter because R is the 6th letter and we want it to include that. And it'll give us back car. Everybody good with that? Any questions? Okay. So moving on. Palindromes are words that are spelled backwards the same that they are spelled forwards. So using string indexing to reverse it, it should give you back the same word. The trick here is using it backwards, and then you want to use the print function in order to see if your word worked. So a tip for this one is that you can do negative slicing. So if you were to do negative slicing, it's going to start at the last letter and run it backwards.
Mhm.
I'm only going to give it about 1 more minute so that we have some time to do some more complex stuff with functions.
So it wasn't allowed.
Really? Yeah, it's in the conference room. With
Like, if you wanted to write something, like delete the
they're all in suit.
But now it's
So
hard
they
to
do have people question.
That's very good.
Yeah, These codes sometimes get sluggy, if it's doing something that it wasn't doing before, and literally did not change a thing, just restart it.
You've all been there in the center.
Okay, so for the first one, the palindrome, I just have a print statement that gives us essentially the normal one so that we can know later on that when we do the reversed one, we did it correctly. So for this one, I'm going to do another print statement. I'm going to say print reverse. And then palindrome, if I can spell, palindrome 1. Okay. So for this one, instead of having it like doing every single index as a negative index and then adding all the strings back together, which is one way to do it, you can tell the step to be negative. So instead of having a start and stop, you can just tell it to start running it backwards and it'll run through it all the way if you just tell it to start from the end. So let's see what happens if we run it in the terminal. Yeah, so it's going to say the normal and the reverse are the same because it's palindrome, which means we did it all correctly. So similarly for the second one, yeah, do you have a question?
Why do you need 2 colons?
Okay, so I'll write it out right now. So the reason I have 2 colons is because the first one is where you want to start, and that's a Python thing. It starts at 0 always. So let me write this in the comments actually. So for indexing, the syntax will be variable, start, stop, and step, where start is equal to 0, stop is non-inclusive, and the last one is step, so how many you want for it to take in between. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but stepping is essentially how many you want it to take. So if you have a step of 1, it'll take every single letter. If you have a step of 2, it's going to print you the first letter, skip the second, and then give you the next one. So it's every second letter. And then you can keep increasing this step or whatever you need it to do. In this case, we want it to run it backwards. So every time it wants to go forward, if we give it a step of -1, it's going to go backwards 1. So if you start at the first one, which is 0, Python always starts at 0 if you leave this first one empty. You can either leave it empty or give it a 0. It's up to you. I'm lazy, so I usually leave it empty. Stop. We want it to run the whole thing, so we can just give it nothing. And then for step, we want it to go backwards, so we give it a -1. So if we print this out in the terminal, oh, never mind. Do not put 0 for this one in this case because it'll just give you a single letter. But if you want it to run the entire thing, forwards and reverse, it's Madam. And I kind of glazed over this. Does everybody know how to get this to run in your terminal? No? Okay. So what I did here is I just moved into the directory that I have this file in. And if you're ever confused or don't know where that is and you have it open in VS Code, it's this big long thing at the top. Yours might be short. Mine is long. Astro 98, teaching. I'm just following this up here. Spring 2025. Discussions. I'm sorry this is so long. And then I'm just going to leave it at discussions because my file, if I do ls, which means list of everything that's in this folder, it's going to show me that the file I want, which is the first one, is in here. And if I type Python 3, the command to run a file in Python, and the reason I'm using Python is because it has .py at the end of it, so it's a Python file, data types and functions, discussion.py, and it'll run everything I tell it to print in my terminal. So all of this, only when I put print in front of it is it going to print in my terminal. Okay, so I'm going to skip the 2.1, your favorite equation. When I upload the solutions to this, you'll be able to see how I did it, my favorite equation. That one's more so for fun. I would like you guys to try 2.2. So that one is write a function with the last digit number, which returns the last digit of a number as a string. So essentially give it a number, say like 1, 2, 3, 4. You want it to return you 4, but as a string. So the setup for that would be your defining statement. We'll call it last digit. And then you want parentheses. And then your code here. However you want to make that happen. And then your return statement. And then finally, since we're not running, or at least I'm not running this in VS Code's terminal, I'm going to go print last digit And then for a function, you can either define a variable. So if I want last digit to take in some number, you can either define number down here and say it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Or what you can do is when you call the function, put it in here and say 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes for that one. I mean, if you want to type that out in Python, you can.
I need a few hours. Not to- I thought charges for listening, so just observing. 355 yesterday.
Cool. Yeah, I accidentally left mine at home today too.
I went through the check. There's a big group of people much smarter than me hanging out, and then I don't feel like angry cosmologists today. They all have soup. It's pretty good.
Where are they?
In 355 right now, a big group of people in suits. I'm just assuming it's a group of cosmologists. I don't know. I don't want to make it mad today. But walking in and kind of wishing my charger.
Any number. For the input and number where you get some string output.
A hint for this one would be referencing what we did up here for the negative indexing. And I'll give you like 1 more minute.
From right to left. Okay, I'm gonna go over this now. It's totally okay if you haven't figured this one out yet. These are pretty difficult when you're first learning them. So for this one, I'm gonna set num, which is the input of our last digit. In this case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm gonna turn it into a string because Python doesn't read 1, 2, 3, 4 as 4 different numbers. It reads it as 1,234, which is one number. So if you just try to turn it into a string, like if you didn't have num equals string and it was just string, it says it can't iterate through that. So you have to set it equal to itself again. Because remember, you're a lot smarter than your computer. Your computer is a little bit stupid, so you have to make it really clear. And then after that, since it's a string and that's something that Python can read separately as individual things, this is when you're going to want to index through it. So we're going to go num, and then we're going to do -1. And the reason we can do just -1 and we don't have to do the 2 colons in front of it is because we only want it to return the last number of it every single time. And every single time, the last number is always going to be a -1 index. We don't want it to run or have a start or stop or anything like that. We just want a single number. And in this case, if we do print last digit and call 1234, it should give us back 4. And in case you don't believe me that that's a string, because to me that looks like an integer, you can always print out the type. And it should tell me that it's a string. Yep. It's telling me that it's a string. Okay. I'm going to do one more pretty complicated example of a function. I'm not going to give you guys time to figure it out. I'm just going to do it and have you guys kind of soak it in. And if you have any questions, I would say let it ruminate with you at home a little bit. And then if you have questions, email one of us or come to office hours. Okay, so for this one, we're using functions that are already built into Python. So up until now, we've been just kind of writing our own functions if we want to add or something. Python has a lot of already pre-established functions. So for example, one is the min function and one is the max function. So if we want to see what these will do, we can just put print around them. And I'm going to print out all of these to see what they do. And essentially what the min and max functions do is that given some sort of list or tuple or dictionary, essentially what's going to happen is that it's going to give you the minimum number. So in this case, it should give me back 3, or in the case of the second one, -20. And similarly with the maximum function, it's going to give you the largest. So it's going to give you the max of the table. So for this one, it should give me back 5. And for the last one, it should give me back 9. So if I save that and run it back in my terminal, yeah, it's giving me what I thought should happen, which is always a good sign. The first one, minimum, is 3. Second one, -20. Last one, since we want the max, it's going to be the biggest number, so 5. And last one, max, is 9 as well. So if we want to write another function, this one's going to be a little bit more complicated. We want it to return x times x plus y, where x and y are the 2 largest members of a positive numbers of a, b, and c. So for starters, we're going to define our function. It's already defined here. We want to call it 2 of 3 and then ABC. So let's first define what we want to call in it. So in this case, we'll just do something really simple. We'll do 1, 2, 3. And then if we want to do that, we can use these two functions, min and max, to give us the output of x plus x, or x times x and y times y. So here we can do x times x plus y times y. That's what we want our output to be. So we need to define x. So x we can find by saying x is equal to the maximum. Actually, I lied. There's no max right now, right? So we need to set it into a list. So I'm going to say numbers equal some list A, B, C. And now we can use the max function. Since A, B, and C are now a list, we can go, okay, x is the maximum of numbers. And if we want to test to make sure our function is running correctly, we can return x, just to make sure that you don't write an entire function and then it doesn't work. So yeah, the maximum of 1, 2, and 3 should be 3. So far it's working pretty good. Okay, now we want to remove x because we want the next maximum number. So for this one, we can say numbers.remove, which is another function. We use remove to remove a certain number from a list. So numbers.remove x, since we already know that the maximum is called x. And again, if you want to do a check, I do this all the time while writing functions. just to make sure I'm not crazy and I don't write 10 lines of code that don't work, I'm going to return numbers and hope and pray that it returns only 1 and 2. Okay, cool. 1 and 2. So now we're going to move on and we're going to say y equals max numbers, because now numbers doesn't have 3. X already takes care of that. So now our new maximum should be 2. And at the end of it, we can go x times x plus y times y, because that's what we're being told to do. That's what the question is prompting. And at the end of it, it should give us 13. Yep, 13. I know I went through that pretty fast. Hopefully that made sense. If it didn't make sense, again, come to office hours, and it's okay. It's a pretty complex example. And I just want to go over a couple things about coding hygiene. As you might have noticed up here in this function, I put a lot of spaces. That's just like one of the things, like as programmers, we want to make sure that our code is readable and easily digestible, because even this file, if you're looking at it and it's super crowded, it gets kind of overwhelming. Putting all the spaces between commas and numbers and parentheses makes it a lot more digestible. So another way to make easier to read code is using semi-descriptive variables. You don't want to represent everything as just like a single letter. Like if you're going to use radius, type out radius instead of R, or like temperature, type out temp instead of T. It just makes it a lot nicer for whoever is coming in and reading your code later, so that they don't keep being introduced to a new variable and going, T, what the heck is T? Is it time, temperature, whatever, period? Okay. So that's one way. And then staying consistent, that's another huge thing. As I mentioned with the spacing before, it makes it a lot easier to read, but if you're inconsistent, then it's going to be even harder. It's like trying to walk up stairs that are all different heights. You never know what you're going to get, and you're probably going to trip. So don't do that to somebody else. Okay. And then the other thing is leaving comments. So these green things, the hashtag in front of them, those are all comments. That tells your computer that you don't want that in your code. So if you comment something out and you run it in your terminal and you're going, why is it not printing out my print statement? Check and make sure it's not behind a comment, because your Python and your code will just straight up not read it and skip over it. Same thing with these. Those 3 quotation marks are going to tell your computer to not read it. We call these a doc string. That's for debugging and some complicated stuff later on down the line. For now, what you need to know is a description inside a function. So again, if somebody else is coming into this and they go, I don't know what this function does, you can write some description here. I'm not going to do it right now, but you can insert your own description there, and it helps the next person who wants to come along and run your function. And that's pretty much all the time we have. So if you have any questions, come ask me right now. I'll hang out for a couple more minutes. But other than that, hope that wasn't too much, and have a good day.
Thank you. Oh.